All right. Now, in this presentation, we are going to be going over Meta1Bank, which was previously known as HoloBank, and how we can use that to simulate a free access economy for ourselves that allows us to continue transacting business with the rest of the world until we grow large enough as our own alternative parallel society that we can switch over to a resource-based free access economy and what that will look like. So with that said, let's jump right in. Go. Okay, so let's start with a brief history of money. What is money? Why was money invented? Let's start there. Just as the priests of ancient Sumeria imposed religions upon the people, which were invented by the shadow government about 6,000 years ago, they also eventually imposed money upon the people, which was also invented by the very same shadow government. I'm not going to go into what that shadow government is or who consists of that shadow government. That's not what this presentation is about. This presentation just assumes that you already know there is a such thing as some kind of shadow government, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions as to what that may be and how that may work. In any case, it is a historical fact written down in stone, no less, that money was originally invented by the Sumerian priests about 6,000 years ago. In fact, the entire economic system and government and taxation system that we use nowadays was invented by these priests about 6,000 years ago in ancient Sumeria. The money was invented and imposed in response to the enslaved masses rising up and demanding human rights for the first time since the deluge. Now, this isn't the first time in history that I'm aware of that we have rose up demanding human rights, but it is the first time since the deluge that this happened. And also the only time in recorded history, written history, that we are aware of that this has happened. Money, what this did is it gave the people a sense of freedom and that the money could be spent on any good or service. You might say the invention of money was the invention of employment as we understand it today. However, you could only purchase as much as you could afford, and the system was designed to put you in debt and keep you in debt. Today, we call this wage slavery or debt slavery. Again, this was invented 6,000 years ago by the ancient Sumerian priests. The Sumerians are ultimately the original inventors of our modern banking, government, and taxation systems, at least as far as written history goes. The only difference between their banking system and today's fiat system is that their clay tablet bills of exchange were backed by quote unquote human labor, because that is what it was invented to regulate. It was not invented to regulate the economy, whereas today's paper money is backed by absolutely nothing but faith. Or if we're being more legal about it, it's technically backed by the debt of the population, right? Anytime somebody takes out a loan, that's considered a debt, and the human labor is, the income tax system. It's basically the same today. It's just defined a little bit differently. But ultimately, our human labor is pledged as collateral against these debts. And that's what our income tax is all about, right? It goes towards paying off the interest on these loans. It doesn't even go towards paying off the principal, it just goes towards paying off the interest. Anyways, this was all prior to using gold as value, which is important to understand, right? Which was also prior to barter and trade. A lot of people think that barter and trade came before gold, came before fiat currency. That's actually wrong. Fiat currency came first, and that's why we started using gold as value, right? We started using gold as value because eventually we realized that people needed to forget that money was created to control human labor, right? So we started using gold as a store of value in order to, veer our attention away from that. And it's only, we only used barter and trade during historical pockets of an absence of, what we call real money, which is, gold, silver, actual physical property, right? So why was money invented? It was invented to keep people enslaved while giving them the illusion of freedom, not actual freedom, but the illusion of freedom. This is what money really is. Does anybody have any questions on that before we continue? Okay. How does money and banking work today? Why is money created the way it's created in today's banking systems? Why is it considered debt? Why do they charge interest? Why does cryptocurrency get mined, but fiat currency is just created out of thin air? Why do the values of different currencies fluctuate in a tradable market the way they do? The answer to all of these questions is the same, and it's very simple. The answer is arbitrary rules. These rules, or rather the rules of these systems, were originally created to benefit those who manage the central banking system and subsequent banks that work within them. It was designed to benefit the elite. Now everyone is just copying them because they don't know what else to do, right? So again, all of the answers to these questions, why money works the way it works, why it's a debt, why they charge interest, it's all just arbitrary rules that they decided to create for the only reason and purpose of benefiting themselves at the expense of everybody else. That's it. Our modern economy is no more and no less than a game of Monopoly designed to be as difficult as possible for those who have very little or are just getting started with nothing, and designed to be greatly beneficial to those who have a lot or have learned to use the rules to their advantage to gain a lot, which is markedly more difficult for people with good moral standards. Now, here's the question. Why don't we just make our own rules? Creating a new society with a new economy allows us to change the rules entirely. Who says money can only be created as a loan? Who says it has to be owed back, let alone with interest? Who says it has to be mined? Who says it has its value has to fluctuate? So here's an idea of some of the new rules that we could create. Right? What if we allow ourselves to create money on demand for purchases of any kind? What if we don't have to owe that money back, let alone with interest? What if we can just create it out of thin air like fiat currency? What if we set its value to be the most stable it can possibly be? What if we allow ourselves to change these rules whenever we find ways of improving upon them to create more freedom for more people? I really apologize for the dog barking in the background. I'm at home now, and well, we're basically kind of a farm here. So if you hear any animals in the background, I apologize for that. Anyways, imagine a free access economy, and this is what it would look like if we were living in a free access economy, right? Now imagine as a business owner or independent contractor, that it doesn't matter how much profit you have to work with anymore, because you can create money on demand for inventory, property, assets, and expansion costs not related to payroll. 100% of your profit could be evenly distributed amongst all your non-member trustees. That's basically your employees who are not members of MetaGaiaes, so that it also benefits them with a hefty pay raise that doesn't affect you at all, but could actually benefit you from an increased productivity as a result of increased motivation. In other words, because you can create money on demand for everything you need now, which allows you to pay for everything that you need except your payroll, obviously, because that has to come from pre-existing money. You can now take 100% of the profit you make as a business and transfer that to your employees who are not members of MetaGaiaes, and therefore not participating in our free access economy, which gives them a pay raise, which increases their motivation and makes everybody more productive. Now also imagine as an aspiring innovator, creative innovator, etc., or an inventor, etc., not having to work a dead-end job to survive while trying to save up to fund your idea into some sad prototype due to a lack of funds or having to deal with not being able to find interested investors or get a business loan, and in the process, risk losing your idea to someone more financially capable of affording it. Imagine being able to buy whatever you needed at a state-of-the-art standard to create an immaculate prototype of your idea. Imagine all the funding you would ever need to start your business right there at your fingertips. Imagine being able to focus extra time and energy on being environmentally conscious in your business practices because you don't have to worry about the additional cost. Imagine being able to flip burgers or stock shelves, or just sit and meditate with others and still be able to afford to live in a mansion all by yourself if you wanted to. Not saying that everybody does, just saying that everybody could. Imagine being able to clean the oceans of all the plastic and other pollutants, despite the fact that you can't make a profit doing so in the secular banking system. Imagine society being able to completely recycle every ounce of its waste in order to perpetuate our resources to support an expanding human civilization. Imagine not having to create laws to prevent greed and corruption because there's no incentive for greed and corruption in a free access economy. Everyone has equal access to infinite wealth, which is far more than greed or corruption could ever get in the first place. So what is the value in it? Some people will argue that money should be backed by something of real value. I think in order for something to represent value, it should actually represent something of value. The question is, what exactly should represent the value of money in MetaGaiaes? Now, the answer we've come up with so far is love. Now, it's not really much different from human labor, but allow me to explain. What is love? Love is service to others. Service to others is time and energy spent towards specific acts of caring for others. So love is the time and energy of members of MetaGaiaes spent in service to others as a trustee, right? Everything in MetaGaiaes operates as trust, so we all operate as trustees. For MetaGaiaes, we can, for example, let that value always be pegged to the record high of gold so that one Meta1 coin always equals the record high value of 1 grain of gold. And let this represent the value of 100 units of love in MetaGaiaes, 1 unit of love being the smallest unit of Meta1 coin. For example, just as 1 penny is the smallest unit of USD, 1 love would be the smallest unit of Meta1 coin, right? Just as an example. Again, this isn't really all that different from the idea of human labor, right? It's time and energy and service to others. But the idea here is that it's giving us a free access economy. We don't have to earn our living anymore necessarily, or earn various classes of living rather. It's just given to us in exchange for any level of service, but also moving forward with the idea that love itself is the most valuable thing in, well, reality, let alone society. How it works. Can this thing move? Cool. All right, how it works. This is the basic idea or process of how this system would work, right? So you swipe your card or you write a check to a particular business for a particular transaction, and that store charges the exchanger, right? Which in this case would be like the Meta5 exchanger, right? So the exchanger then charges Meta1Bank plus the fee, right? So show me the money. Meta1 coins are therefore created for the transaction by Meta1Bank and basically given to the exchanger, which then exchanges the Meta1 coins for, say, USD, and then deposits that money into the business's bank account, and they take their fee. That's basically it. It's really that simple. Rather than us moving money from one account to another account, or just creating that money and then exchanging it and then depositing it. That's it. That's all there is to it. All we're really doing is taking the step of creating the loan out of the process, right? And going straight into the transaction. That's really all we're doing. That's the only change from the traditional banking system. Well, aside from the fact that we're also not hiding the fact that, we are money creators as creditors and not just debtors who owe money back. All right, so private sovereign natural law trusts. As it currently stands, every bank account at Meta1Bank is set to be a private, non-statutory, irrevocable trust. This is different from all other banks, in which all other banks can create several different types of bank accounts, from personal checking accounts and savings accounts to business accounts to trust accounts. Well, at Meta1Bank, they only allow for private, non-statutory, irrevocable trust accounts, and that's it, which means they only allow real human beings to create such accounts. Now, for MetaGaiaes, I propose that we take the power of Meta1Bank's private non-statutory trust, Brilliance and Commerce's natural law trust, and the concept of the sovereign social trust, such as, for example, the US Constitution or the Paris Treaty, et cetera, and combine all of these together to make every UFO and council and their bank accounts a private, sovereign, irrevocable natural law trust. That's kind of a handful of words, but they all have a very specific meaning and purpose in legal linguistics.
Cameron, can you define UFO for those who haven't been here before?
Yeah, sorry. So for those who haven't seen the previous presentations, a UFO stands for Unified Fractal Organism, and it's basically our term in MetaGaiaes for a business or organization. Basically, we understand the fact that all of nature is organized as organisms within organisms within organisms, aka reality is a unified fractal organism, right? Fractal meaning holographically organized. And hence we have taken that term to use for our businesses and organizations. So that's what that word means. So let's take a moment to explain what these terms mean: private, sovereign, irrevocable, natural law trust. Private essentially means that it's in the private jurisdiction, right? So there's two sides to law in the legal world of politics and society. There's the private side and the public side, right? So the word private here marks that it is in the private side of law, which means that it is not subject to any public jurisdictions of law, which would be, for example, United States Code, Internal Revenue, or Internal Revenue Code, the UN's code. Basically, as a private side of law, it's subject only to private equity law, which is the Uniform Commercial Code, which is basically just the law of sovereigns in how, contract law, basically, for how sovereigns operate to ensure fair and equitable relationships amongst contracts among sovereigns, right? Sovereign here, the inclusion of that term basically is added because, as historical precedents of such sovereign and divine trusts existing, only sovereign and divine trusts can be considered quote unquote creators at law, meaning they have the ability to create such things as their own currency or their own money supply, right? So that's the reason for including the word sovereign in the name of these trusts. Irrevocable means that neither the grantor nor any outside party of the trust can revoke the trust, which means to shut it down, right? Except through the processes that are defined by the trust itself, right? It also means that the trust cannot be irrevoked simply because a trustee or the grantor has died or passed on or retired, or whatever the case may mean, without naming a successor trustee, because, as private equity law would state, a trust cannot fail for want of a trustee, right? So the trust must go on even if there is no trustee until a new trustee is named or takes over the trust. So that's what irrevocable means. It cannot be revoked. It cannot be shut down. And it cannot be changed or amended, the terms or conditions, except outside of the dictations of the policies within the trust. Natural law means that the trust itself is domiciled in the original jurisdiction of natural law. So this basically just notifies any party of any suing party or court or other jurisdiction, what jurisdiction you are domiciled in, and therefore what jurisdiction you would have to go through to fulfill any claim or whatever against this trust as a defendant, right, in the court of law. So that's essentially what that handful of terminology means and why I suggest we use that specific terminology. Now, remember, our trusts are a bit different from the typical trust, as our grantors must be a human and everyone that works within a UFO must be a trustee. And the beneficiaries are our customers, clients, patients, etc. Our grantors also maintain managerial responsibilities, such as in the capacity of an executive trustee. Now, this is different from your typical trusts, where in number one, the grantor does not actually have to be a real human being. It can be a legal entity, such as a corporation or an LLC. But in MetaGaiaes, this cannot be the case. It must be a real human being. Also, in a trust, especially as regards a business, everyone that works within a business doesn't necessarily need to be the trustee. Generally, there's like a board of directors at the top of a corporation. When it comes to trust, there's also usually like a board of trustees at the top of a trust, right? And that's assuming they're using the same pyramid organizational model that the rest of society uses, right? And then the beneficiaries are usually like the trustees or the grantor's children, right? Who benefit from that trust. Well, we do things a little bit differently because these trusts for the organizations are not like being recognized as private estate trusts, which is the way that they're kind of recognized in secular society, right? These are being recognized as, you know, organizations that are intending to serve society as well as participate in the administration of society. So, you know, in our society, it's like kind of a public jurisdiction kind of a thing, although it's still technically private jurisdiction to the rest of the world, which I know is confusing, and I'm sorry for confusing you like that. But in any case, moving on from that. Where was I? I just totally cut off my mind by saying that. Our grantors need to be humans. Our beneficiaries are, yeah, so we're basically taking the idea of a trust and turning it into what it used to be to what it really is meant to be, right? Now, private trusts are still going to operate as, you know, a grantor could be anyone could be the trustees. The beneficiaries are going to be, you know, whoever you want them to be to benefit from that trust. But when it comes to our UFOs, again, we're going to operate a little bit differently, where the grantor is a real human being and they have managerial responsibility, whereas in a typical trust, a grantor does not. Only the trustees are allowed to have managerial responsibility. And instead of our beneficiaries being our decedents, they're going to be the customers, clients, patients of that business, right? Because they are the ones who benefit from that business, is the way that we see it, right? So these are how the trusts are going to work in the case of our UFOs for MetaGaiaes. And normally it would be a problem to operate our trusts like this when it comes to income tax law in other jurisdictions, because they could basically claim, sorry, this isn't how private trusts operate. You're basically operating as a registered corporation and therefore you need to start paying income taxes, except for the fact that we are not only domiciling all of these trusts in an alternative society and not in their jurisdiction, as well as in the private jurisdiction of natural law, but we are also using Meta1Bank accounts, our own bank, our own central banking system, that they don't even have physical or digital access to. So there's literally nothing they can do to try and enact those laws against us for using these trusts in a different way than they typically have been used throughout history. So that protects us from any backlash that might otherwise occur in that regard, as far as these differences are concerned. So there's nothing to worry about there. So there will be two sides to Meta1Bank when we create the MetaGaiaes side, right? There's the personal private side, which is what already exists, right? And this side, individual human beings can set up a personal account as a private non-statutory natural law trust, in particular for their own private estate. And for MetaGaiaes members, this means your private estate exists outside of MetaGaiaes, right? Your private estate is your own personal kingdom. It's important to remember this, right? You are the king or queen of your own private estate. And then as a member of MetaGaiaes, you're taking that level of sovereignty and coming together in relationship with other sovereigns in order to thrive as a whole society, right? But your private estate, your personal property, that's your personal kingdom, right? It's important that we understand this, right? We have our personal kingdoms, and then we come together as a society for the purpose of thriving, right? Now, the MetaGaiaes private side, right? It's private to the rest of the world, but to us, it's basically like our public side. And this side, the UFOs set up, rather than us as a person, the UFOs set up a business account rather than a personal account, but a business account trust as a private sovereign natural law trust. These accounts may store money like any other account, but they are primarily used for creating money on demand. Unlike these accounts, which are used for storing and transferring money, these accounts are used for creating money, right, for our free access economy. These accounts issue the Meta1 cards and Meta checkbooks to all trustees of that UFO who are also members of MetaGaiaes, otherwise known as member trustees, right? And that's what allows us to, that's basically how we get paid for working at that UFO and being a member of MetaGaiaes, is we get to create money on demand. And that's a totally separate side of MetaGaiaes. But in order to get to that point, we have some obstacles that we need to overcome, right? And again, I have not spoken to the executive trustee or any trustee of Meta1Bank about this yet. It's important to understand that this proposal I'm about to show you is not set in stone, but this is what I'm going to propose to them as a way for us to overcome this obstacle. Now, the obstacle is that currently Meta1Bank attracts a lot of heat from certain secular so-called authorities, such as the FBI and the SEC. These so-called authorities want to charge Meta1Bank and its trustees with fraud, which they would be able to do if Meta1Bank was within their jurisdiction. And that's because, they're operating in ways that their laws would consider fraud. But the problem is, well, it's not a problem for Meta1Bank, it's a problem for them. This Meta1Bank doesn't operate in their jurisdiction, so they don't have to follow their laws. So all they can really do is harass them, but that's what they're doing, and they keep doing it, and they have their eye on them, right? So there's nothing they can do, but they're just continually harassing Meta1Bank. And we need to solve this problem because we don't want that kind of attention moving forward, so that we can do what we want to do under the radar, right? Now, this can be resolved by no longer being an investment bank, but rather an escrow bank. Currently, Meta1Bank is considered an investment bank, right? It's supposed to be somewhere you can put your money and allow it to grow and make a profit, right? And that's one of the biggest reasons that they have heat on them right now, is because the way they do this, or the way that they back the value and increase the value of their money, they're not actually really even breaking any laws. They're just they're doing things differently than the prescribed method of banking in, the SEC and FBI, typical public jurisdictions. And, as a result, that makes these guys want to shut them down and consider them for fraud and prevent them from helping as many people as they possibly can. So in order for us to change Meta1Bank from an investment bank over to an escrow bank, we have to change the defined value of the Meta1 coin from the way they currently define it to just simply the highest high of gold, right? That way we are changing the nature of the bank. That way we are changing the value from an increasing value, making it an investment bank, to a stable value, making it an escrow bank, right? And then we also have to change the nature of the bank in its public certificate of trust from the nature of investment bank over to escrow bank. And its other public documents as may be necessary, and then release a press release about that change in order to make it official. Now, hopefully that will do the trick, right? And as the world's most stable coin, no longer being an investment coin, but an escrow coin, hopefully this will get their attention off of us. And furthermore, if we upgrade the Meta5 trader so that it is not an investment platform, but simply a currency exchange service for our transactions, then Meta1Bank really will no longer be an investment bank. And hopefully this will make the so-called authorities stop caring about Meta1Bank. And then we will be able to move forward, launching under the radar our free access economy by creating the MetaGaiaes side of Meta1Bank and allowing only MetaGaiaes members to create money on demand through these specific trust accounts. But we don't want to create this side of the bank while we still have heat on us, right? We need to solve this problem before we do this, because if they see us creating money on demand for transactions, that's going to attract a whole nother kind of attention and a whole nother series of harassment on fraud, even though we're not in their jurisdiction. So we want to get this attention off of us before we do this. Moving forward, establishing a free access economy while using money so that we can still transact business with the rest of the world is only step one. This helps us experience life the way it was meant to be experienced, while still allowing us to do business with the rest of the secular world while we continue to grow. Once we grow large enough that we no longer need to do business with the secular world anymore, that is when all the money we create to spend at each other's UFOs will uselessly begin to pile up inside our accounts without ever moving anywhere. This is when people will be able to begin questioning, why do we still use money? Wouldn't it be the same if we stopped using money altogether? And that is when we can establish a resource-based free access economy. By this time, we should have created such an advanced civilization that most people don't need to work anymore. So it is best to just get rid of the idea that we have to earn our right to live anymore altogether at this point. So what is a resource-based free access economy? How does that work? All right, so while using money and allowing purchase transactions to regulate the distribution of resources, we are experiencing what I'd call a service-based free access economy. That means you only get free access so long as you serve a UFO in some capacity, so far defined as a minimum service of 4 hours per week. In a resource-based economy, we still have transactions, but these transactions no longer have a money exchange. Instead, it's just an inventory accounting process in order to track product and resource flow. We will need to develop software in which every UFO can quickly and easily tell the system what it needs to order and what waste or resources it has to offer. The software will be designed to determine the most efficient distribution routes for the various transportation service UFOs to follow to ensure that everyone always gets what they need as quickly as possible. If we recycle our waste properly and create nothing but high quality products that last, we should not only never run out of resources, but we should also be able to provide a luxurious abundance to every single human being, whether or not they work. And that's basically what a free access economy looks like, right? We basically just use this software to not regulate, but track the accounting processes of our products and resources. So we know who needs what, when, and how much, and who has what, how much to offer, so that we can figure out, whose resources need to go where in order to keep everything flowing to provide a luxurious abundance for everyone, right? It's actually amazingly simple. The hard part is just developing the initial software, simply because we don't have a template to work on yet. We have to literally invent every single piece of code for it. But that doesn't mean we can't do it. And with the resources that we've already attained, human-wise, as far as software engineers and coders, we really have everything we need already to begin developing this. It's just a matter of defining the syntax and protocols and then getting everybody to work on it. All right, so, first we have to actually launch MetaGaiaes and do some other things, but everything's already coming into place. So hyperinflation. As we can see by the already sharp rise in fuel costs, which is already beginning to drive up prices on the commodities market for basic foodstuffs, we are in the beginning stages of hyperinflation. This hyperinflation will only continue to get worse, but hopefully slowly enough that we can make it until we establish our free access economy banking system. It is imperative that we work as quickly as possible to make the necessary changes to get the attention of the so-called authorities off of Meta1Bank so that we can set up our free access economy under the radar. Hyperinflation in their economy with a free access economy in our society will attract the attention of many regular people, as opposed to the authorities, as they wonder how we continue to afford so much so easily, right? Because inflation's rising for them, and yet we have free access economy, so everything's nice and easy for us. So that kind of draws the attention of the regular people. They're wondering, hey, how come you can still afford so much so easily? This allows us to let them know. Now, this could work to our advantage, allowing us to grow rapidly so that we can get to the point of providing benefits to our host, quote unquote, nations, states and towns or cities, before they have a chance to recognize what we are doing and shut us down before we are large enough to make them think twice about trying. Mutually beneficial relationships. I'm going to break this last part down into more detail here. While we are still small, if they catch on to our free access economy, they're going to try and charge us with crimes such as fraud and counterfeiting, even though neither of those crimes are true. But once we're large enough, say 10% of a given population, there will simply be too many of us for them to get away with arresting just a few of us and expect to make a difference, or try to commit an act of war on their own territory in the midst of their own citizenry, which would be an absolute last resort option for them. They simply wouldn't want to do that, right? Because we are right here where they are, right? So this is when we can send ambassadors to negotiate terms of a peaceful arrangement with them, in which we are granted access to continue doing what we are doing in exchange for providing for all of their infrastructure needs free of charge, right? This is how we can create a mutually beneficial relationship with them. Furthermore, we explain that every time we spend our money in their economy, it provides money to their economy that didn't exist before, hence counterfeiting, which allows them to pay off both the principal and the interest on their debts more easily over time. Again, creating a mutually beneficial relationship. So assuming they don't choose to outright consider joining us as a result of this kind of stuff, this should be more than enough to establish a mutually beneficial long-term relationship that allows both our societies to thrive side by side in the same territory. Now, what was I going to say? Darn, I forgot what I was going to say. Anybody have any questions so far while I think about that?
Yeah, Cameron, I have a question for you.
All right, go ahead.
So, there are groups like the elite, right, are also trying to do this. Let's go back to the resource-based economy. They're also proposing this idea in their New World Order of developing an AI that will manage resources for humanity, right? So, how is this different than what they're proposing that on the surface seems very similar?
Well, that's a good question, and one that I honestly can't say I know the correct answer to at this point because I've never seen their software or how it's designed to work. Um, it also has recently come to my attention that the UN itself may not actually be the bad guy. It's just a small handful of people within the UN and their array of agencies that are the bad guys. So there's that to consider as well. Now, I believe the technology that you're talking about originates from the Venus Project. And it's actually their idea that this idea comes from. They are the originators of this idea for the resource-based economy and using software to regulate it by tracking product and resource flow. It's entirely their idea. Now, how they plan on implementing it is, the question. Maybe they do plan on doing the same thing as us. Maybe they don't. I don't know. I also don't know how they plan on transitioning from a monetary based economy over to that. But I do know that right now that they are planning on creating central bank digital currency systems next, and not immediately going into any kind of resource-based free access economy type of system yet. So I don't know. It could be that they're very similar. It could be that they're very different. We do know that the Agenda 21/2030 agenda or protocols are not designed to produce freedom for people. They're designed to produce slavery. So I can only imagine that they're working to try and make their AI software system work in so much that it does not provide for the freedom of everybody, but the slavery of the most for the benefit of the few. I can only imagine that's their goal because, well, for 6,000 years, that's what they've always done.
Can I take a crack at giving just a little bit of another answer too?
Sure.
Okay, so, well, one main difference I would imagine is, like you were saying, it's sort of very important that, I forget the exact terminology, but every person that has a Meta1Bank account, it will be a private, sovereign, irrevocable natural law trust. Is that correct?
Correct.
I highly doubt that this is the idea that the UN or any sort of New World Order agency has in mind. And like, that's only one particular details, but I think that's where the difference lies is probably in the details and the nuances. Like, you're going to great lengths to try to demonstrate that you want everyone to have like freedom of in their domain. And it's not clear from the rhetoric coming out from the UN or New World Order agencies that they also they're not like emphasizing that as much as you're emphasizing.
No, they
that.
most certainly don't. They emphasize sustainability and all the buzzwords that everybody wants to hear as far as like the being green and ecologically friendly and all that. But yeah, no, they don't include any language regarding freedom or sovereignty or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Michael. I also want to welcome you here. We can chat a little bit more after we finish the recording, just to get to know each other. But yeah, if there's any other questions for Kamiron about this this topic, let's go for them.
Yeah, it's actually the end of the presentation, so it's question time.
Yeah, Kamiron, I've got a question here. There's an awful lot here to get your head wrapped around this. It's confusing. It's risky. Okay. Okay. And,
Well, it was risky to create the United States of America too. So
well, that's true. But how does one go about like validating that these trusts are actually something that you can participate in, that you know, you don't end up with FBI agents knocking on your door like in my case? Okay. And you know, the only way I can see this moving forward is if you were to attach yourselves to some very influential people that have a global reach, okay, that would have time to analyze this, and if they were to embrace it, they could actually be quite useful in moving it forward.
I'm sure the time will eventually come when such global people will see what we're doing here and say, hey, I like that. I want to, you know, join in on this. And I don't know when, I don't know who, but, you know, I have faith that that's part of the divine plan for the unfolding of all this. Anything else? Anyone else?
I'll just piggyback a little bit off what you were mentioning, Raymond. I think like for people who aren't well studied in this type of legal field of knowledge, getting it more and more to a point where like the terms are more and more accessible, and that it, like, in the sense, if I wanted to prove to myself that this is like viable or feasible, like that I could do it. I know some of it is sort of like deep study into like, you know, maritime law and all this other type of stuff. But yeah, I think that the more that becomes available, and you know, maybe there even would be like a sub team of people that, you know, would work on such a thing, I think the more than regular people who just aren't not so knowledgeable about this study area would be more like likely to be like, okay, maybe I'm more likely to take a risk on this or something.
Well, Robert Dunlap, the executive trustee of Meta1Bank, is one of the most well-studied people I've met so far when it comes to the law. His knowledge of the law blows even my mind, and you know, I've studied quite a bit, and I've met people who have studied the law for 60 plus years, and his knowledge blows even them out of the water. It's crazy. I have no idea how he amassed so much knowledge in such a short period of time, but he did, and he's become a very powerful person as a result of that. I mean, there's not very many people I know of that would be able to stave off lawsuits from the FBI, the SEC, the United States federal government, the federal court itself, you know, and take them to the International Court of Justice and have their judges and, you know, other people arrested and brought to Gitmo, you know, for crimes against humanity. Like, he's actually accomplished this kind of stuff. And as a result of that, he's actually paved the way in many regards to make certain things a lot easier for us, right? Now, they're still harassing him in many ways, as much as they can, but it's gotten to the point now, like when he files paperwork with the court, they go, oh, fuck, it's Robert Dunlap again, you know, because they know that his knowledge is so extensive that they've tried every trick in the book to try and get them back under his jurisdiction. And he knows all of those tricks. He gets around them. He tricks them. He baits them into creating attacks on him so that he could turn it around, right, and charge them with a crime instead. And so he's been doing this for about 5 years now. And so, you know, moving forward into the future with some of the problems that we're going to come across with future lawsuits from, you know, potential parties and certain things and so forth, we already have certain legal matters established that, you know, through the work of Robert Dunlap, that's going to work in our favor. You know, that when we start filing certain paperworks and notifications, especially with Robert Dunlap's name on it, they're just gonna be like, oh, fuck, all right, so just move it through, pass it along, you know, keep it quiet, don't let the public know, just, you know, whatever. So yeah, that.
So Cameron, there was a comment in the chat here that said, they're worried about not being able to kind of convince enough people to join up while there's this investigations and the potential for fraud. I mean, like,
well, right. So that's exactly why we want to get rid of the heat that's on Meta1Bank first before we do anything. And then we want to try and fly under the radar for as long as possible, right? Like we want to try and increase our population to a good 10% of a given area before we really, you know, hopefully before they catch on to who we are, what we're doing, and the fact that we're an alternative society and that we're creating our own money on demand for transactions, right? Now, being that we're using our own bank, we don't have to file any, you know, statements or any, you know, filings with the SEC or the IRS, right? So hopefully with all that, we'll be able to fly under the radar long enough that they don't catch on to what we're doing. And there's really no way they should be able to, as long as we don't have their attention in the first place. And, you know, once we have a large enough population, then hopefully they won't even catch on. It'll be us going into their town halls and saying, hey, by the way, we're here now. Our population equals X amount of your population. And we now have all the resources necessary to move forward with a mutually beneficial relationship with you, doing this for you. And in exchange for that, we'd like to have you just basically leave us alone and let us do what we do. And see if that works out. Because at some point they're going to catch on anyways, and it would be better for us to, you know, be the ones revealing it and working towards a beneficial relationship rather than them catching on to what we're doing and then being like, oh, what are you doing? You know, so. But it could go either way, and we're going to have pockets all over the world, so you never know. And
yeah, the next question is one that actually came up in my mind. You know, if certain people do, if you know, things don't go perfectly and certain people do get targeted that are within the organization, are there plans to provide or help them with information regarding legal defenses, that kind of things, to protect them?
That's the thing about sovereignty, and I think that's one of the reasons that it is a prerequisite of joining MetaGaiaes that you work on becoming a sovereign prior to even applying to join MetaGaiaes, right? Because if you don't have the basic understanding of what the law really entails and what your rights really are, how to properly assert your rights as a sovereign, then you shouldn't be joining MetaGaiaes, because of the potential for, you know, in the beginning foundational years, of the potential for, you know, a backlash against you, right? That's a risk that you have to be willing to take. And if you don't know how to, if you don't know what the law is, your place in it, how to assert your sovereign rights properly, then, you know, you're taking on even more risk. If you understand the law and how to assert your rights properly as a sovereign, you're actually taking on significantly less risk, if not zero risk, because you're actually following the law properly, unlike everybody else in the world. Everybody else in the world is actually committing fraud and crimes. The people that the FBI and the SEC want us to think are committing fraud and crimes are actually the people operating properly. But, you know, just like nothing's happened to Robert Dunlap these past 4 years that he's been operating, because he knows how to operate properly, nothing will happen to us if we know how to operate properly. All right. So that's your personal risk that you have to take on. You have to study the law for yourself to understand how to operate properly in sovereignty. It's your responsibility to protect yourself. And you either believe in the vision of MetaGaiaes or you don't. And if you don't, then you don't help co-create it. You don't take that risk.